I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other God before me. Quick question, am I quoting scripture here, or am I inviting you to join the Holy Church of Abeling-Judge, where we will gather together in worship and prayer, we will read scripture, we will do good community service works, and you will all worship me because I am God in a living embodiment sense. Let's put a pin in that question and come back to it, because I'm seeing a couple of smiling faces and a couple of, is he serious? Like, this is clearly just for show. What's going on here? Good for you for laughing in the back row. And yes, I did see, and that is an indication of some skepticism. You do not offhand immediately accept that I am God. And you probably shouldn't. That denotes a healthy amount of skepticism, but it also comes from a place of safety. You, I'm going to assume, came from a loving and supportive family. You have a good, solid social friend group here, a strong sense of identity and work ethic towards the things that you're pursuing. I only ask that you keep that in mind, that it is a position of relative strength that you come from emotionally and psychologically when we discuss the following cases. Because like myself, the following 5 people all claimed either that they were God, or that they were the second coming of Jesus, or usually along Christian themes and ideals as they come up. But let's see if we can spot some interesting patterns along the way. So let me first introduce the case studies that we will be discussing. Meet Major Reverend Jealous Divine, a preacher for early to mid 1900s America who believed himself to be God incarnate, or claimed to be God incarnate. I'll leave it up to you to figure out which is which. Meet Krishna Venta, a man who claimed to be he was the second coming of Jesus. Meet Shoko Asahara, a poor Japanese man who, amongst many other claims, also claimed divine status. I believe he considered himself the second coming of Christ as well. Vernon Howell, aka David Koresh of the Branch Davidians. God spoke to him as a boy, saying, "You are the second coming of Jesus. You will lead the prophesied growth of a new civilization and society." And lastly, the Reverend Jim Jones. Now, his claims were that he was the second coming of Jesus, as many others have claimed, but his claims were never made publicly. They only came to light from former members of his church who were disavowed or who left leadership, that he would say these things while preaching. So what do these men have in common? Well, there's a couple of themes that come up in this discussion, and we'll take them one by one. First is, where does faith come from? From family, from internal belief, through hardship, difficulty, struggle, and finding a source of strength and growth through spiritual text. These are perfectly reasonable explanations. In terms of what his followers came to call him as Father Divine, he most likely was the son of slaves. I say most likely because there's not a lot that historians have been able to definitively prove about his childhood. And later on in his life, when people would ask where he was born and how he came up, if you claimed you were God, would you answer those questions with human answers, or would you say, "I have always been"? So we're kind of stuck with not great answers there. But he likely was the son of slaves, born either in Georgia or Maryland, took to preaching early in life, and actually fell under the leadership of a man called Father Jehovah, who started the concept, or at least for him, started the concept of preaching as though he were God. And he took Major Father Divine here under his wing, basically called him Jesus. Krishna Venta, he was born in 1911 in San Francisco, the son of Jewish immigrants. And when I say son of immigrants in the early 1900s, hopefully that paints a picture of most likely experienced hardship in childhood, i.e. poverty, most likely experienced discrimination from an early age. I say most likely because, as with Father Divine, the early life biography is a little bit skimpy. But he also experienced hardship as a soldier. He served our country in World War II and took to the Bible to find comfort during difficult times. Mr. Asahara, on the other hand, was born in Japan. He was born to a poor family in a rural province, and he was born with physical difficulties. He was born blind in one eye and partially blind in the other. So in his childhood, he spent time at a school solely for the blind. And if you've ever heard the phrase, the one-eyed man is king in the land of blind people, people who've looked into his life history report that he was a bully as a kid. Because if you're partially sighted in a world full of people who are physically blind, apparently you're going to take advantage of that. But like the others, he sought spiritual enlightenment. He explored a wide variety of faith groups, just a couple of which were Buddhism, Hinduism, took a lot of elements from Christianity in the formation of his belief system. David Koresh, aka born Vernon Howell, was born to a 16-year-old single mother, had a difficult, socially awkward upbringing as a child, found solace and comfort in the Bible, and even from an early teen years, he could quote long passages of scripture entirely from memory. And fourth, we have the Reverend Jim Jones. His father was an older man, retired or had experienced combat in World War I. He was a disabled veteran who turned to alcohol to help solve his problems. His mother was much, much younger, and the family was perceived by their community to be poor white trash. So in his early days, he sought out answers, he sought comfort, he sought God, and sought him from many different sources. He went to a wide variety of churches to sit in on their worship practices, to kind of learn the different perspectives of how God is viewed, is worshipped, is practiced, and all of these would feed into his practices later on when he formed his own church. So very early on, Father Divine adopts, or was, if you choose to accept his answer, the persona that he is the physical embodiment of God. He sets up church in New York. He gains a larger and larger community of worshipers, and he preaches that race is a social construct, not a biological one. This is the early 1900s. That was really controversial. But he gets a good blend of white and black parishioners.
This is Jim Jones?
This is Father Divine. Sorry, so we moved back up. I'll try to keep track on that one. So he gains membership, and he actually gains enough money that he is able to purchase a house in a largely white neighborhood, which of course causes lots of scandal because he decides that Sunday will be a feast day. He brings his congregants to his home where he's practicing and preaching from anyway. But they put out elaborate meals as a form of community. That's quite reasonable. Lots of communities do that today. This, of course, pisses off the mostly white, all white / mostly angry congregation or people who are in that neighborhood, and he gets into small amounts of legal trouble along the way. But he continues practicing, he continues worshiping. Onward to Mr. Venta, who again, by this point is claiming he's the second coming of Jesus. He builds his own church. He preaches peace and tolerance. And if you want to join his church, there's a small caveat. You have to surrender your worldly possessions. So come worship with me and also give me all of your money. And he gets a large and sizable congregation of people. In fact, so much that he has enough money to buy 25 acres of land. He's in California, but it's a little bit more remote. And it allows him to set up his own community where they can practice, preach, serve the common good. He does a lot to provide meals for homeless, dealing with things like alcoholism. There's a local plane crash, and he is first on the scene to make sure they're organizing fundraisers for the families of the victims. So he is very much an active part of his community. Mr. Asahara builds an entire religious community called Aum Shinrikyo. Don't ask me to spell it offhand. I've written it out several times, but feel free to look it up on your own time if you want to. In Japanese society, there is a very strong push for success by social terms. Going to good schools, establishing good careers, providing to the community itself. It's a little bit more putting society over your individual needs. And while we should all strive to make that balance of balancing my own personal needs with service to my community, that creates a lot of intense psychological pressure for the youth of Japan, And since he is preaching a message of stepping away from that, creating a worship space for yourself, a space for you to grow personally and emotionally and spiritually by blending a wider variety of different spiritual practices. And also, I'm the second coming of Jesus, and I'm going to say this with a lot more charisma and charm and style. He is able to build a very, very large community. In fact, takes off. It becomes a global concept with over 10,000 members around the world. We will move right along to David Koresh, who finds a community group outside of Waco, Texas. They're called the Branch Davidians. They're a very conservative religious movement, so conservative, so strong in their beliefs, that mainstream society is largely corrupted. They want to create their own community. He joins them. He eventually begins having an affair with the widow of the original leader of the group. This angers her son a little bit. Koresh and several of his followers are forced out for many years. They actually come back, get into a gun battle with the son of the founder. I'm oversimplifying a lot of stuff here, but Koresh does not serve prison time. He is acquitted for the trial, and the son of the original leader of the group ultimately goes to prison on tax fraud charges. So now there is a spiritual leader position that's available, and Koresh rises to power. Lastly, we're back to the Reverend Jim Jones. He has established the People's Temple. He has moved himself to California. He preaches racial integration. This is the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. That is a hot button issue. He and his wife adopt multiracial children. He rants on and does a lot of community service work about homelessness, about addiction problems, about good, honest community service, and he begins to travel the world, and he fixates a lot on South America. So how about we just finish this chat here and all feel good about ourselves? Sadly, no. I'm going to flip the order a little bit, and we will start with Mr. Benta. So in addition to all of his charitable works and the establishment of his own faith group, apparently the idea that you are the second coming of Jesus maybe gives you license to make certain demands of your congregation. And by that I mean he started sleeping with the wives of his community. And this irritated some of the members. And by irritated, I mean 2 men who had worshipped under him as part of this faith group believed that he had slept with their wives, and they wanted to accost him on that point. And they chose to do so by buying lots of explosives, wearing them under their clothes, and confronting him during a meeting. The resulting explosion killed the 2 of them, killed him, killed 3 other members of the congregation, including children, and started off a fire that burned 150 acres of land. The church survived for a short period of time after his death, but if your church is based around one person claiming divine right, and that person's physical body isn't there anymore, you'll lose a lot of what keeps your community whole. The church collapses. Onward to Aum Shinrikyo in Japan. Now, Mr. Asahara has reached a point where he draws one particular theme from Christian mythology, exploration, text, the Armageddon. He is very much of the belief that the end of the world is coming very, very soon, and that only members of Aum will survive. And fun fact, other people's souls can be saved if we, members of Aum, kill them first. Yeah, I see a couple of surprised looks going on right now. This does not end well. In 1995, acting on his order, members of Aum Shinrikyo infiltrate the subway stations and the subway system in Tokyo, Japan, and release sarin gas. It is a very, very deadly chemical agent. It kills 14 people, and it wounds and injures as much as 1,000 other people. It's one of the worst domestic terror attacks that happens in the country of Japan. There's a full-fledged investigation. His role is brought to light. He is tried, convicted, and in a very rare move for the nation of Japan, he was actually put to death in 2018. So what happens to David Koresh now that he is leader of the Branch Davidian movement outside of Waco, Texas? He also begins preaching about the apocalypse. Yeah, none of these stories, well, I won't say that none of these stories end well, but most of them don't. So he begins preaching his own version of the apocalypse, and he has two very specific ideas that form the basis of his belief system. The first is, after the apocalypse, there will be 24 people that become the New World Order leaders. Not entirely sure where he gets the number 24 from. That's a good scriptural question to consider. But he decides these 24 must be his children. That means he's going to have to start sleeping with many different women. And by women, I am including young girls. We don't know how many people he had sex with or coerced into a sexual relationship. We do know that that wasn't what brought in law enforcement's attention. The second part of his scripture is the stockpiling of weaponry. With the apocalypse, there will be social chaos and anarchy. We, the members of the Branch Davidians, need to arm ourselves and be prepared for combat. So let's begin loading up on shotguns, on rifles, on as much automatic weaponry as we can possibly lay our hands on. This brings the attention of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And in 1993, federal agents attempt a raid on the compound. Gunfire is exchanged between both sides. Individuals are killed and injured, and the FBI lays about a 2-month siege on this compound. It's about 51 days. At the end of which, acting under orders from the United States Attorney General, federal agents roll in. They're going to take the compound. They're firing tear gas. They're rolling in up-armored vehicles. They are bringing a strong armed presence to bring this conflict to an end right now, except the compound is all old wood buildings and dry wood furniture, and probably not up to fire safety standards of the time. So what do you think happened? A giant fire in which most of the Branch Davidians are killed. The aftermath of the incident, they find Koresh's body, and it was not fire that killed him. There's a bullet hole inside of him. So did he commit suicide, or did a disillusioned member of his faith group turn on him in the last moments? We'll never have an answer to that question, and that is not the most depressing of the stories that we're getting to today. Reverend Jim Jones also begins preaching about the apocalypse. This is the 60s and 70s. So one thing he's particularly worried about is nuclear Armageddon. We're in the Cold War arms race. We and the Soviets have built nuclear technology. We and the Soviets are not socially advanced enough to understand how wildly dangerous that is. So we begin mass producing very large-scale weapons. He becomes fixated that this will spark the apocalypse, so he moves his entire congregation to South America, to land that he's purchased. And over the mid-70s, he gets to about 1,000 members at his new commune. However, there are accusations and rumors and stories from former members and from the family of people who are now part of his isolated religious community. Accusations of sexual abuse. He coerced or forced women to have sex with him, and apparently some men too. Accusations of substance use and other problematic behaviors. And these accusations and rumors get loud enough to call the attention of the United States Congress. Congressman Leo Ryan from California actually leads a fact-finding mission down to South America. He and a group of people go to the compound, meet with Jim Jones, meet with several members who are there, and they actually take some home with them. Like several people who are part of this community say, "We don't want to be here anymore, can you take us back?" So they all go back to the airport, and as they're boarding the flight, they are ambushed by a hit squad sent by Jones. Either sent by him or overzealous members of his inner circle. But the congressman is killed. Those who attempted to flee were killed. A handful of them survive, make it back to America to report the incident that has occurred. But if you are claiming to be the second coming of Jesus and your members have now murdered a congressman, you're very quickly going to come to the conclusion that this will invite a stronger presence from the United States military. He tells his rough 900 plus people that the United States Armed Forces are going to come and take them away. And here's what we need to do. He actually calls it revolutionary suicide. Bear in mind, roughly 1/3 of the people in this compound are young children. And certainly, if your religious leader tells you that we have to commit suicide en masse, maybe you'll believe him, but some of you might say, I don't want to do this, I'm not comfortable with it. That's okay. There are enough people that support my belief that we will ritualistically murder you by injecting you with cyanide and then ingesting it's not Kool-Aid, but it's a sugary fruit-based drink mixed with cyanide. It is one of the largest mass suicides in human history. And if you're morbidly curious, and I have never listened to this and don't plan to, there is an actual audio recording of the event, of him dictating his people that this is what we must do. So that brings us back full circle. Let us end then with Father Divine. His is the good story. So he gets in trouble with his white neighbors. He actually gets arrested and convicted of disturbing the peace, but he's only serving a short amount of jail time for it. This is the 1930s. And 3 days after he goes to jail, the judge who sentenced him drops dead of a heart attack. And when he is reached for comment in his jail cell, Father Divine's answer is, I hated that he made me do it. But he spends the rest of his life continuing his faith group, leading his community, ultimately kind of moving to a separate mansion that somebody donated to him. But relatively few accusations of fraud. To my knowledge, no credible accusations of sexual assault or encouragement of mass suicide. Either he dies in 1965 of old age, or, if he truly was God, he left that physical form in 1965, but there are still individuals who worship at the church that he established, and it's still functional today. So, it doesn't always turn out bad if you claim that you're God or that you have divine right. But let's go back to my initial question, and we'll end here for today. Am I actually God, or am I quoting scripture? What do you think?